start by talking about hinges. I think one of the most popular or common questions that we're coming across both on our help desk and also on this Facebook group is the topic of hinges. So I wanted to do a little bit of a dive into talking about just how you can set up and modify standard hinges, and then also dive in and take a look at probably the two most common questions that we get about hinges, which would be the blind corner hinges and the corner 90-degree hinges. So think of like a joining two doors together. So I think those are the two topics I'll kick it off and talk about when we get started. And then as questions come through, ask your questions along the way, and we'll have a bit of time for Q&A after we sort of go through this general hinge discussion. But if you think of a question at any stage, just drop it in the comments. If you want your name sort of attached to that, just make sure you approve EVMux, so that way we can basically know who we're talking to when we're responding to any questions and comments. Otherwise, it will come through as just anonymous. So now that we've got the general housekeeping out of the way, let's dive in and see if we can start talking about these hinges. So as I mentioned, I think the hinge topic that I wanted to discuss, first of all, is looking at the ones I've got pictured on the screen here. So we've got our blind corner hinges and our corner 90 hinges. They're the two that are probably the two in Mozaik that are not considered kind of out of the box standard hinges. They're basically not sort of natively supported within the software. You can add those hinges by adding operations or a few various tips and tricks that you can do. And I'm going to look at how we've sort of set them up in the CADmate library and share that information with you. That way, hopefully, this will all make sense. And then you can, go ahead and draw these hinges. So let me share the screen here, and I'll go through and see what we can do and talk about hinges in general. So I'm going to zoom to a big sort of preview of the screen. Hopefully that's nice and clear for everyone to see. First of all, let's look at a standard hinge. So to edit a standard hinge, we want to jump into libraries and then come down to hardware. That's going to open up the hardware library editor. Okay, so when you're on there, it might default to guides. Just go across and click on hinges, and that's going to get you to the hinge tab. Of course, this information is all really well documented. Like most screens in Mozaik, you can click the blue question mark, and that's going to open up and show you what each of these do. But I'm also just going to give you a quick run through now. So at the top of the screen here, we have the name of the hinge. This one's called Bloom 110 Standard. We do have a picture of the hinge that you can change to a picture that you prefer. Then we've got some general cost information, so the total cost of that individual hinge item, any markup you want to apply to that hinge, and then any dollar add-on amount you want to add to that hinge. Coming across, we have a tick box for horizontal. So if that's not ticked, the hinges are going to be a vertical spaced mounting plates, or for another word, it's commonly referred to as a wing line hinge rather than an inline hinge. So the wing representing that it's a wing plate and it's vertical hinge drilling. So as you can see, it's referring to the mounting plate, not actually the hinge itself. And if I tick that box, you'll see the mounting plate hole shift to be horizontal rather than vertical. Coming down, we just have a comment for the hinge. So whatever you want that to say there is just a general comment. And then we come down to the generic area here that's talking about the actual positioning and size of these hinges. So this is mostly referring to the hinge plate on this page. And then we can get into the drill button in a second, which will look at the drilling specs for the hinges. So coming down, we've got 84 millimeters. Of course, you can flick between millimeters and inches on the units in the bottom right-hand corner. I'm going to be going through this in millimeters. So we have 84 millimeters from the bottom of the door to the bottom of the hinge plate hole. So that's the most, that basically is saying from the bottom of the door to the bottom of the hinge plate hole is 84 millimeters. Now, generally, these hinges are all 32 millimeter increments, meaning that there's a gap of 32 mil between the hinge plate holes, which if you add 16 millimeters, half of 32 to the 84, that's going to give you a total of 100 millimeters to the center of that hinge. So that's the critical bit of information there, just understanding that that is referring to the middle of that first hole there. And if you want to know what it is to the center of your actual sort of 35 mil hole for the hinge, that would be adding 16 millimeters, which is half of 32, to that measurement down there. We've also got the setback. So standard setback would be 37 millimeters for most hinges, or most hinge plates, I should say. The distance between, as you can see, is 32. That's what I was just referring to there. That is the most common for most hinges on the market. Next one down where it says 900. Now that is basically the distance or the height that door would need to be before Mozaik would put a third hinge in. So once it exceeds 900, then it's going to add a third hinge in the middle between those two hinges. On the right-hand side here, we have the diameter. So I'm drilling a 5 millimeter hole, 13 millimeters deep, and that's going to be my hinge mounting plate hole. Coming up here, we have the drill button. So I'm going to click on the hinge cup drilling button there, and that's going to open up the hinge cup drilling section. So as you can see, the 100 millimeters is being derived from the 84 plus half of the 32, and that's giving me 100 mil there to the center of my hinge cup. We've got the distance that the hinge is set from the outside edge of the door to the hinge cup. So that can fluctuate, but for most hinges, it's going to be somewhere between 3 to 5 millimeters, depending on, I guess, how much tweak you want on the adjustment there. But there are generally, most providers will give you a spec for the hinge to say like it can range from this to this. We have them set by default at 5 millimeters. Then we have the diameter of the hinge cup hole at 35 millimeters and the depth of that hole at 13 millimeters. Coming across then, we have the anchor holes for the hinge. So for a Blum pattern, it's 45 millimeters between the two anchor holes. They're an 8 millimeter hole. We want to drill that about 12 millimeters deep. And they're set back 9.5 millimeters from the center of the hinge hole itself to the anchor hole, to the center of the anchor hole. So that's the controlling how far we're setting that back. And that's basically all there really is to setting up a standard hinge. As you can see within this dialog here, there's no option for specialty hinges. And as we mentioned at the start, the specialty hinges would be things like the blind corner hinge and the corner 90 hinge, the two examples I want to sort of talk about and drill down into in this presentation. So let's do that next. We'll hit OK. I've got two of those cabinets on my screen that I've dragged out from the CADmate V11 library. So let's start with the blind corner cabinet. So we're going to double click on this one. I'm going to show you here what I'm referring to. So let me make this nice and large so it's fairly clear and easy to understand. And I'm just going to go ahead and change that to a wireframe mode so you can see these hinges. So as you can see, we've got a hinge hole here. And the hinge plate hole, rather than being on the end of the cabinet, is on the blind panel in this example. And so what I'm referring to here is how to get Mozaik to drill these hinge plate holes on the blind panel. So if we can see on the standard hinge itself here would just be applied like any other hinge in Mozaik. It would be on the face of that cabinet, just making that a door hinged off the left. And if you go into the overrides, you'll have the ability there to just nominate whichever hinge you want to use in that example. That way you can specifically pick up like a blind corner hinge just for the ordering and pricing perspective if you want to assign that from that perspective there. But for this one here, I've just got this set to a door and it's not hinged. There are a couple of tricks here, like you could set that to a door hinged on the right and then just apply a hinge that just has the plate holes on and the anchor hole, the main sort of cup hole set to 0. That's a bit of a workaround that works. Our library's been set up a certain way where we've got the operations actually tied to the door itself. So if you have a look here, you'll see in the parts list, the door is green, indicating that we've got some custom operations on there. And if I go ahead and view this in 3D again, you'll see the one I've got highlighted is the red one here, and that's my blind panel. So let's click edit there and go into edit operations, and I'll show you kind of how that's working in the background. Again, I'm going to try and make that a bit bigger so you can see it a bit clearer. And I'm going to flip that door over so you can see the operations. So you can see here that we have these operations. They've got some formulas on them. And we've also got some hidden operations down the bottom there because commonly most clients are going to need to flick between Blum hinges and headage hinges, the two most common and popular hinges in our market. So what we've done there is we've hidden the hinges based on, or have modified these hinge plate holes based on whether or not you've selected for this to be a Blum or a Headitch hinge. So let's look at the way you do that. So I'm going to hit OK here and jump out. And I'm going to go to parameters. Now, this could be changed here locally on this one cabinet, or it could be changed for the entire job. If you're going to have multiple blind corner cabinets in the job, it's quicker just to change this in the job parameters. But for the purpose of the exercise, I'll show you on a local product level. So I'm going to click the select product parameter button down here. And what I want to do is make sure I'm selecting the other folder, as this is where some of the custom parameters set up by our team at CADMate have been dropped in here. So if we come down, you'll see, and keep in mind, you'll need to be running the latest sort of CADMate V11 library for this option to be there, as it's something relatively new that we've added in. And you'll see there's an option there that says bifold hinge, and it asks you to select a pattern for the bifold hinge. So I'm just going to click OK there, and that's going to add that option into this cabinet. And then what you'll see is you can click the value and choose between Blum and Headitch. So if I was to change that, and before I change that, I'm actually going to bring this up in 3D so you can see this sort of side by side. I'll just see if I can sort of stack these, arrange these windows so it's a bit easier for you to see. So that way you can see this at the same time. As you can see, we've got the hinge plate holes for Blum there, and then we're going to drop that down and choose Headitch. And then you can see that the holes are clearly moving further away as the Headitch pattern, I think it's 27 or 28 mil from memory, compared to the Blum, which is like 21 or 22 mil from the side. And that can be checked in the door itself. You can go into Edit and Edit Operations, flip the door over, and grab one of the plate holes. And as you can see there's a value that tells us it's 21.5 mil for the Blum, and for the Headitch, it's 31 mil. So it's just moving the holes according to the selection there. All right, we did have a question come through here. I'll just share this on the screen so we can have a quick look. All right, so Pavel is asking question about the optimizer. When I'm using vertical drilling to bore holes in my parts, my question is there any way to separate the G code for each file in my part to be in the cutting list? Let's see. I think you're sort of diverting maybe from the topic a little bit, but I'll definitely come back and answer that question. Let's have a look at the next question here. Can you turn that blind corner into a breakfast bar corner with a door on the end? Okay, so yeah, Brock's asking here if we can take that blind corner and have a breakfast bar with a door on the opposite end. So yeah, that's a great question there. Definitely possible. If we jump out of here for a second, of course, we can take this corner wall and we can tick the invisible wall button by selecting that. That way you'd obviously have a breakfast bar going that way. And I think what you're asking there is whether or not this side can actually be a door. It's certainly possible. Of course, you'd probably look at how you would construct that, because you've got a top rail running through there that would have nothing to really attach to in that scenario. So maybe you'd build the cupboard differently, but just at a high level, understanding how to make that change. If we go to shape, you can certainly click on that left-hand side and then change that from being a end to a face. So I could make that a left face. And as you can see, that's removed the end. And then I can go to my face tab. I can change my face to a left face, click on the opening here, and then drop that down and make that a door. I would need something to hinge that on. So I'm going to make that hinged on the left in this case. So that way my door is hinging off on the left side of that cabinet. And just to show you that in a bit of a clearer perspective here. So I've added a door there and I've hinged it off the back of the cabinet, I guess you would say. So certainly possible to go ahead and do that, Brock. You might want to play with the construction, because obviously your shelf's got nothing to hinge off at the moment. So you might want to add now like a division in there first. There's a few ways you could sort of go about that, but I'd probably delete the shelf to start with. I'd click in the opening, add a partition. It depends, like you might want that to stop here or something like that, and your shelf only go to a certain section. That way this sort of becomes the opening, if you like, for the breakfast bar access into that cabinet. And that way you've got the blind corner section to a certain amount, and then you've got your breakfast bar coming in from that perspective. So hopefully that helps answer your question there. Thanks, that's a good one. Appreciate the input. All right, we're getting a question here about face frame coming through. So let's have a look at this one. We're a face frame shop with dado. Dado width slop only being applied to the top of the dado. How could you get the slop to go both ways in the dado? We sand our face frames to our decks flush. So I think what you're asking there is how do you change the face, or how do you change the dado width to apply to both sections? The dado width slop is applicable across everywhere where there is a dado. So if you go into your parameters there, and we go into dados and we look at the width slop, you'll see that this is not applicable just to sort of one scenario. It's applied everywhere where there is a dado. So in this preview, it's showing like a partition going in, or a stretcher going into the end of a cabinet. It's just sort of spun sideways. But that same concept applies everywhere where you apply your dados. So whether you're using qualified dados or full dados, the width slop is really the tolerance or thickness that you want to allow for. So if you're suggesting that you sand your face frames and you don't want to apply the dado, you could certainly have the width slop. You could certainly set that to 0, but whatever you set there will be applicable across all of your dados. And if you're finding that's not the case, then probably best to send that specific scenario that you're looking at directly to our help desk so we can have a look at that for you. All right, so let's move on and we'll look at going back to the corner cabinet now. So we're going to jump in this example to this 90-degree corner cabinet and look at how the hinge drilling works there. So I'm going to double click on this one. And let's take a look at this one first of all in 3D. So again, we'll just zoom in nice and close. All right, so we've got here on the left-hand side our regular hinge. So that's our regular hinge with the normal hinge plate. And then in the middle here, we've got the Blum corner 90-degree hinge, or it can also be the head hitch hinge as well. So if you have a look there, you'll see that this hinge cup hole is actually overhanging the door slightly, as the Blum ones tend to do. And then you've got your hinge plate on the associated door. So that way these doors will open together and then all hinge from the side of the cabinet here. Now, how have we done that? So again, we've applied custom drilling operations. So if we go into the door here and click edit, that's going to bring up the part properties, and then we click edit operations and it's going to show us these operations. Little quick tip here, if you've seen the operations as a brown operation, it just means that you're looking at it from the other side. So it means the operations are on the flip side there. So what you want to do first of all is just click the flip button to simply flip that over, and you'll see the operations will either appear this sort of grayish color there, just indicating that the operations there are on the same side. So if we click on one of those operations there, what you'll see, you can basically, there's going to be different formulas for each of these ones. So we've got formulas just controlling how far in it's coming, and that's coming from a custom parameter called hinge center, and I'm going to show you that as well. And then there's also the distances controlling how far back in they come. So these can be set for Blum or head hitch. Again, we've got those saved in the library under specific folders, but you can overwrite them on the fly. And I'm going to show you that because what I wanted to show you is really how these, I guess, operations will disappear when you change your door style, because they're actually part of this door style. And it's probably easier for me to demonstrate that for it to make sense. So let's take a look. So right now, my door style for this particular room is set to a standard door. So that's just the name of my door style. And those custom added hinge operations are tied to that standard door. So what that means, if I go ahead and I change my style, so I've picked a different style, I'm going to lose those custom operations. So we've made an easy way for you to get them back. So if I go into settings here and then I go ahead and I choose a different template, I'm going to choose my shaker door template, and that's going to apply my shaker door style. As you can see, my doors are now set to a different style. And if I go back into that and into the 3D viewer, what you're going to see is I've still got my plate holes because they're coming from a different perspective, but it's the custom added holes that I've added there that are no longer visible. So what do we do? How do we get them back? So what we want to do here is, if I can view this over here, I'm just going to move this to the side so I can show you this at the same time. So we're going to go to the parts list and we're going to click on the door, and we're just going to make sure we're selecting the right door. So there's two doors in, they're both hinged on the left. I want this one here, so that way I can see that one's highlighted red. I know I've got the right door. I'm going to go ahead and press edit and edit operations. Now, rather than just adding those operations back in, there's a much quicker way. So I'm going to go to shape and I'm going to go load from library. And in the shape libraries, if you're running the CADmate library, you'll have an option here called the 90 corner hinge drilling. Drop that down, click on that option, and you'll see that you've got the option there to drop these ones in. So whether it's a left or a right, you can click on the appropriate one, and that's going to bring through the correct holes. So it's just as simple as that. It is just applying a library part to bring those operations back through. So then that's basically how that works. So it's really easy to drag and drop, and you could set up the different ones saved in your library for different door styles if you like. We are looking at some improvements there to try and automate that better, but at the moment that's the sort of best workaround we've come up with for that scenario. That way you can easily get those drilling operations on the doors. And as you can see, if you go to a high detailed mode, you'll see a better preview of that hole. All right, so hopefully that makes a little more sense then on how those hinges work. So they are custom added operations. Now, if we take a look into the library, you'll see that what I'm referring to there, we do have different folders for different options. So coming down into the corner 90, the base corner 90 cabinets are all set up with the Blum hinges. And then we've specifically got a different folder for the base corner 90 cabinets for head hitch drilling. The main difference on the head hitch drilling pattern there really is just that those options are not overhanging. The head hitch hinge sits further in. So depending on which style you're using, you can just drag out the appropriate one. All right, I'm going to have a quick read of the questions here and see what we can get into. So let's see. We want to be able to add Frameless to our arsenal. But there are just so many ways to do it, parameter-wise. I don't know where to start, really. Yeah, good question. I guess from a perspective, like Frameless is actually sort of far easier than face frame. There's a lot less things to think about, really. It's more just the way you want to build that box. And, there's so many different schools of thought on how you might want to build that box. Everyone has their own preferences, whether it's internal backs or external backs or ends to the floor, ends to the kick. There's so many different ways, but I guess what I can give you is probably the most common way that we come across, and we're in a market that is 99.99% frameless. We really don't see much face frame over here at all. So what I'll probably go through and just show you is a couple of the ways that you can just simply control those parameters to know what you get in, and just the sort of way that most people tend to build that box. So looking at a cabinet here, let's take a look at the general way this is constructed, right? So we have the back inside of the ends, and the back is running over the bottom, and if there was a full top, it would be running over the top. Most people tend to do base cabinets with just a simple front rail, and you could use a back rail as well, but that's total personal preference sort of thing. But this would be the most common method across Australia and New Zealand. This is probably what we see the most of. Of course, there's always variations to this. We find when people are sort of coming from a panel saw, they tend to use external backs because that's kind of the way they've always done it. That really comes down to the machinery, really. Like when you're cutting on a panel saw, there's a bit more room for error than a CNC is always going to cut everything perfectly square. When you're using a CNC to construct your cabinets, really internal backs, having the backs inside the end is much preferable because it squares the cabinet up. You're not going to be able to build that out of square. That's probably the most common reason for that. There's different schools of thought into the strength factor. To be honest, I don't really buy into many of them. I've installed plenty of kitchens in my day, and I've never sort of seen a cabinet be ripped down from a wall regardless of how it was built, regardless whether it was just screwed or nailed or glued and nailed or however it was assembled. I think there's a lot of things that are going to give way before the actual cabinet starts to fall apart, especially when they're all joined together in a line as well. So yeah, and thanks for just sharing that. You've mentioned that you're a CNC shop, so I would definitely recommend then this sort of approach of having the back inside the ends and having the back running over the bottom. And it just depends. You can run your bottom through as well. That's again another personal preference, depending on what you want to do. But just to give you a little bit of a preview of how this works parameter wise, if we just have this image, I'll just stack the image to the side here, and we'll see if we can sort of change the parameters and see what's going on. So we go into parameters and we select, and I'm just going to do this on one local cabinet level. You would do this on a library level if you're setting up your library, but just jumping into the parameters here, there's a few key ones. Like the most first one that I would sort of get right is the way the back and the ends of the cabinet connect, which would be in the backs category. And it's this first option here, or the third option down, the back and the unfinished end joint. And if you click on that option and click the question mark, it's really well documented. You're going to see the different options here. So really we're deciding whether the back goes over the ends or the back butts into the end. And if you had a recess, the back goes through to the wall, or if the back just butts into the end and the end finishes flush with the back if there was a recess. So I'd have to turn on a recess to show you that. And then the third option would be the qualified tenon blind dado option. So let's have a look. The two most popular ones would be the first two in the list. So if I was to bring that option through when I'm looking at case depth, that's what I'm getting. And case depth and flush with back are going to appear exactly the same in this scenario unless I put a recess in there. So just look at that. We'll just take a quick look at that difference there. So we'll jump in and we'll put a back recess in here. And I'm going to make it really obvious and just put something like 50 millimeters, like 2 inches, just so I can see that pretty clearly. So when it's flush with back, what we've noticed is that the end has remained flush with the back, and there's now a 50 millimeter or 2 inch gap between the cabinet and the wall. And when I go case depth, the difference is now that 50 millimeter or 2 inch gap is from the end of the cabinet. So the ends go all the way to the wall and the back comes in, and everything else will come in, like the adjustable shelves or drawers or whatever you put inside that. It's all parametric, so it's all going to stretch automatically. But what you're seeing there is just with the way that works. So it's whether or not you want the back recess to be taken coming in. The recess could be definitely for a cleat. So the question you sort of shared there would be, would that back recess be for a cleat? Could definitely be for a cleat or like a wall mount or something like that. But it also could be just purely because the walls are a fair way out of square and you don't want to have the backs kind of hitting the wall. If it was, pictured sort of installing cabinets against a brick wall or a sandstone or a sort of a wall that's really not square at all, you're going to want to have a recess there. That way you can just make sure that you've got the tolerance to get the cabinets installed level and square. So coming back, and the other option would be plant on back. Again, that still takes the recess into consideration. So if you have zero recess, it's all the way back against the wall. If you have a recess, it pulls it off. But what you'll see change straight away is that the ends are now in sort of stopping at the back. So if I quickly swap between those two, the ends are over the back's internal, or the back's a full external back and the ends are internal. They're the two most popular ways for sure. I find this way is more popular with people that are sort of transitioning from a panel saw style of manufacturing to a CNC for the first time. I find that guys that are doing or have used a CNC for a long time tend to stick more with the backs inside of the ends. Then from there, you have various choices. Like I mentioned, how does the bottom work? So if we jump in and we go to the ends category, most of the other options are really on this ends category. So if we have a look at this one, long bottom at base, if I turn that one on, what you'll see here is that the bottom runs over. Now, this is going, if you do your construction this way, this is definitely going to affect your previous answer to the backs, because as you can see, with this style, you're going to end up with a section there that's missing because your bottom's running all the way under the ends are going all the way back, and your backs are coming down. So you would need to change a couple of things. You would either need to put your back on top of the bottom as well, or you would need to make your back external. So looking at those two choices then, plant on back would fix that scenario because then your back's external. But if you wanted to stick with the internal back, then I would change one more setting, which would be I would stack the back on top of the bottom. So we go back to the backs category there and we look at the back to bottom connection. I would change that option there. Let's see, just grab the right one. Back to bottom, I would change that to case depth. So that way my bottom's now running completely underneath my cabinet and everything else is on top of that. Definitely less common for that method for what we see, but it's definitely there are people out there that do it that way. So it really does come down to personal preferences. But I think for most guys, it would be a case of that first method that I've shown you there would be the most popular. So tend to set it up this way out of the box. Let's have a look here. Double mullions. Let's see. Also, doubles as material to scribe to the wall. Yes, that's definitely true. Having that recess there can also give you an option like that. You might want to scribe the actual cabinet to the wall as well. So that's certainly the case. You can definitely do that. I find it's probably more common for frameless guys to put an external panel on, and panels can be handled a couple of different ways as well. So you can go to your shape tab and you can click on the end, and I could change that from an unfinished end to an applied door. And that way I'm going to get the same door style that I'm using. So if I'm using the shaker style, what you'll see there is that it's going to apply that door style straight away to the cabinet. So I think that's a fairly popular way of doing it, having a separate panel that you drop on. And it doesn't have to be part of the cabinet here. It can certainly be a separate item altogether. So that's something that you might want to consider when looking at frameless. Let's have a look at some of the other questions that have come through. Let's see. All right, so when changing settings to cabinets, adjustable feet, what's the best way to change the setting to start on every job? Great question. So these settings that I'm changing here, they're parameters for this one cabinet. Now, at the moment, I haven't saved that cabinet back to my library, so the next time I drag and drop that cabinet out, these parameters are not going to be there. If I want, I can go ahead and save this cabinet to my library, and these local cabinet parameters that I've modified are then going to be saved into my library. If you want to do that for every job, for example, what you do is you go into libraries and then into products. And then what you'll see here, you're in the product editor and there's an option that says library parameters at the top. So make sure you select the right library, the library that you're using, and then click the parameters button. And what you'll see here at the top, it actually says you're editing the library parameters for the CADMate V11 library. So you know that you're in the right area based on that. And what this means is that you're changing these settings then in the library level, which will be applied every time you start a new job. So every time you start a new job, it's going to pick these options that are defined in the library level parameters. And you can have different options or different selections there. Just to go back in there for a second, one thing I will explain there, if there's 2 or 3 ways that you manufacture commonly, you've got a concept there called a construction method. So where it says standard construction methods, you can just press save as, and you can save that construction method as something, so you can give that a name. And then what happens there when you're on a job level and starting the job out and you're in the library area, you can simply drop that construction method down and say, well, it's this method that I want to apply for this job. So it's pretty easy to have multiple different ways of building cabinets. And it's very common to have you might do a screw construction that's just a butt joint. You might do a dado or a mortise and tenon, as it's known over here, or like a qualified dado construction. So there's different options that you can certainly go ahead and choose and control fairly easily. Question there, how do you do dados for the back? Great question. To be honest, my preference is to not do that. Or if I'm going to do that, I do it as a full dado rather than a qualified dado, mainly because I'm trying to avoid having flip side machining on the back. And I'll give you a bit of a preview here. So I'm just going to go back here to this being an unfinished end. And let's take a look at this option. So we'll go into parameters. And again, we're going to go into select product parameters and we're going to go into the dados. So In the dados here, you would need to obviously enable the dados. So I'm going to show you just first of all how to turn dados on in general for a cabinet. So let's go and dado the bottom into the ends, okay? And I'm going to say I want to go, I don't know, 6 mil, 8 mil, something like that. It's the distance that I'm going into the end. 8 would be like half the thickness of the end. So the end 16 millimeters, I'm going half of it in. It probably doesn't need to be that far because it's more of just a locator. You're probably still going to have a screw construction with that as well. So for that perspective, I would probably only go about 6 mil, maybe even less. And then I'm going to do the same to the top. So I'm going to drop that parameter in there and add that option. So what you can see so far, what we've got, and if I just show you this in a hidden mode, and I'm going to enable the high detail mode and then press the explode button. Sorry, it might be sort of hidden by my camera there. I'm going to press the explode button here and then explode that out so you can kind of get a bit of an idea of what I'm seeing here. So I've got a qualified dado happening on my rail, okay, and that's then dropping a mortise or a dado into the side of the cabinet. And then when those items come together, they simply slot together like so. Now, to get that on the back, certainly possible. Let's have a look at the different options. So I'm going to jump back out of there for a second and go back to parameters. And I'm going to go ahead and, before I move on, I'd probably do this to like a fixed shelf, a partition. They're typically where I do them more so than the other parts, because if you're going to have a fixed shelf, it really helps you locate where that fixed shelf needs to go in your cabinet. Same with a partition. And then moving down, you've got options here for how do you want to dado the back into your ends. So this comes back to the first part of this topic, which was talking about whether your back's internal or external. So it's the exact same question, and you can see it's just how far do you want that dado to go into the end. So you can click on that option there and certainly give that a value as well. And then when I go to my 3D view, and I'll turn on high detail again so you can sort of see it a bit clearer and explode that out. So now I've got this happening there as a full dado rather than a qualified one. And again, the reason is I don't want to end up having to machine the outside of that back down to create the qualified tenon. What that does instantly, pretty much on most cabinets where there's an adjustable shelf hole, it's going to force double-sided machining, meaning I'm going to have to use the flip side machining feature, which is totally fine. You can certainly do that, and you can have flip side machining. I tend to try and avoid it on cabinets because at the end of the day, it is slower. It's going to take more time to do, and really you can avoid it. You don't really need to have that on a cabinet. So, I tend to avoid it for that reason. And it also, I kind of like the option of the full dado here, because it gives you just a nice shoulder to basically insert that into, and a nice flat solid area for the screw to go through into as well. So, and then the back basically doesn't need any operations at all for the mortise and tenon or for the qualified dado. So I find that's a really nice method and way of constructing that, and I find that super strong as well. Then the back can just slot straight in, screw in, and that works really well. So my personal preference, that's how I would go about dadoing the back. All right, let's have a look at some of the other questions. Okay, I create a cabinet with a drawer front at the face with an inner drawer internal that I moor to suit hampers or bins. Okay, I think I get what you're saying there. You're saying sort of you've got a bin cabinet and then you want to have an inner drawer above it. That's certainly achievable. We can go ahead there, and I'm just going to drag out one of the bin cabinets. So in our library here under base standard cabinets, you'll find there's an option there that says, I'm looking in the right area, it's actually under drawers from memory. I might even just show you I'll show you two ways. I'll show you just basically how to take a standard drawer cabinet and change that as well, because I think that's important to know. And this really depends on whether you're using standard drawers, like a 5-piece drawer box, or a metal-sided drawer. The reason I say that is because on the adjustments here, if I go into adjust, you'll see that If you're using a 5-piece drawer box, you can simply just adjust the bottom clearance and move that 5-piece drawer up. However, if you are using a metal sided drawer, and 99% of people in Australia and New Zealand do, then you need to approach it slightly differently. You need to go into overrides and pick a drawer style that you've configured for a bin. And I'm going to preview this one, the Blum Taro bin. If I click on that option and hit OK, what you'll see is that the drilling and the drawer style has moved up by a certain amount. That amount's all controlled in the drawer guides hardware area. But now I've still got room above that if I want to drop an inner drawer in. So I can certainly go into interior, click in here, click split, make that a tray, click above the tray and define how far down I want that to start from the top of my cabinet. On the tray itself and press overrides, and then choose which height tray I want to use. So at the moment it's using an M height, which I'm just going to look, it looks like I probably need to either push that further up or reduce that tray. So the tray height there of 138 is probably a bit misleading as well in this particular example, because it's taking into account the overall height of that sort of space. A little bit difficult to explain, but I could show you in the hardware category. And then you can see I can get room above that for the M height drawer. So you can certainly do an inner drawer inside of a cabinet with a pull-out bin assigned. We also, worth noting while we're talking about pull-out bins, in our cabinet library, we've recently added the Hideaway Cancello range. So there's a laundry range as well as a kitchen range, and they've recently added a 350 wide bin range, which is really cool. So, previously the smallest you could get was 400, but now they do have a 350 wide bin. So if you didn't know about that, that's a really good option, because it means that you've got a narrow bin option for a kitchen. So certainly something you might want to consider. So as I mentioned, there's the laundry range as well as the kitchen range. So I'll place that anyway and show you the laundry option. So 2 options there that you can certainly use. All right, let's have a look at some of the other questions. All right, let's see. All right, Ferris has said, "Hey Dave, would we be how would be the easiest way to adjust one drawer cabinet to suit a laundry hamper or specific bin? At the moment, the drawer is towards the bottom, and I can't raise it, raise the guide." It's exactly actually what I just spoke about there. If you want to control the settings, so if you're using a metal-sided drawer, a soft close metal drawer, you want to go into libraries and hardware. And I'll show you the one that's in our library here. So in drawer guides, there's one called Blum Taro bin drawer that's just got the one option in there. The bottom clearance is set to 469 millimeters, which is the distance that we kind of require to push it up to allow for the bin itself. And if we go into the edit that option, you've got in here a side boring tab, and all of the wide drillings at 493. So it's been lifted up as well to accommodate that extra height. And the front boring, you can see, is at 507. Again, that's been lifted up by that same bottom clearance amount to give us the clearance we need. And when we drop that particular drawer in, that's how that one's going to behave. So you can do that for any of the drawers that are in the library. Basically, all you want to do, like say, for example, if you use something like the Finista drawers or Finista Swift, you can go ahead and export them, import them back in, delete any of the guide links you don't want, and then start changing those settings to suit the way that you want to build them. So certainly achievable. The other option would be to use an inner drawer, an insert, I should say, which is exactly how these Cancello laundry hampers have been set up. So they're actually using an insert, and the insert itself has some operations on there for the drilling on the side of the cabinets. At the moment, there's no option to add insert drilling onto the door face or the drawer front itself. Hopefully that'll be something coming in the future, but at the moment, what you could do, you could use the insert to certainly do the side drilling, And then when you go to the parts tab, you could click on your drawer part itself, go to edit operations, flip the drawer over, and then drop on any drilling information you need to connect to that particular hardware item. So achievable in quite a few different ways, really. I guess is the simplest way to answer that question. All right, let's have a look at some of the other questions here. All right, so can you show us how to cut MDF doors with special mullions and glass in the back side? Certainly. So having a look at that, the door library itself, if you go into libraries doors, that's where you want to start. I'm going to go to the routed category. Let's create a brand new door, and I'm just going to call this example glass and hit OK. Right, I'm going to make this a little bit bigger again just to try and stretch it out so you guys can see it a bit clearer. So I'm on the routed category. I've added a door called example glass. On the left-hand side, I've got margins. So at the moment, set to 50 millimeters, around about 2 inches. So depending on what you want that margin to be, you can certainly go through and control that there. So when you've said, you've asked for MDF doors, but with special mullions. So I'm not too sure what you mean by special mullions. There is an option here where you right-click on the inside of the routed section, and you can go select special mullions. That might be what you're referring to. If it is, that's really easy. You just right click and choose the option. So you could go ahead and say, look, I want a X diagonal shape, and then you can go ahead and choose the amount. So if you want to say like maybe half of the outside rail, I'm going to say 25 millimeters, around about 1 inch. And then that's going to give me that particular option. Now, what I do with that is really controlled in the panel type on the right hand side here. So one piece just means I'm just going to have that as a routed pattern. Pocket would mean I'm pocketing those out as kind of like a shaker section. So you can do that. You'd need to specify a recess there. So I'm going to say 6 mil deep and show you that again. So let's make that a little bit bigger and clearer. So again, that's now creating a shaker section for each of those, but they can also be glass, which is I think is what you're getting at. So if we go down to the panel type there and choose glass, then it's going to drop glass into each of those sections. And as we can see then, that's giving us a glass appearance with the special mullions and how we want that. Now, of course, there's going to be something to consider depending on how you're gonna do that glass. Like, there's two ways, right? You could either pocket out that back section and just have one sheet of glass that goes in, one pane of glass that just gets dropped in from the back. I doubt you're going to get the glazer to sort of cut that glass on those angles for you. You'd probably do it the other way, realistically. So this is where then you want to come in and start doing some manual edits. So I'm going to take this door and I'm going to edit this option, right? So let's have a look. So as soon as you've sort of used the special mullions there, your push to edit option is removed there. So right, what I would need to do would be to sort of edit this door on a product level. So if we were to, let's just drag out a door cabinet, drop that in, go to face, override the door, go ahead and pick my new door style. Should be at the bottom of my list. I can control what tooling I want to use there and then go ahead and get into that section. And in the parts list here, I've still got my door. I can go into edit operations, and that's the face operation basically, which is the front side that's got all my cutouts for those options. I'm going to flip the door over and I'm going to add now a pocket to the back. And this is where then you'll either utilize formulas or just simple values to define the size of the pocket. So you might want to go ahead and just move that location, or you might want to specify I want to start 50 mil in. Again, it depends. That pocket, I probably want to go like 40 million. I might want like a 10 mil overhang. You can click in there and you can define that, lock that at 40 if you like. With the Y value, it's going to be something along the lines of part width minus 40. And I'll copy that just because I'll need that again in a second. Go ahead and do the same to this point here. And on this side, I'm going to say part length minus 40. Same one over here. So I'll just start at 40. And then this one will just be 40 by 40, just to give you a bit of an idea. And obviously I'm going to go ahead and choose the depth of that pocket, what I want depending on my glass thickness, and then what tool I might want to use. So I might want to go ahead and pick like a 40 mil hugger or something. And I might also want to come in and clean that up as well. So I might want to also apply a toolpath of like a shaker profile to come in and clean up after that as well. So effectively what I'm trying to do there, and I'll just show you on a little bit larger preview here. On the one side, I'm trying to have my profile of whatever I want it to happen here, but on the back side, I want to pocket that down so that way I can just drop one sheet of glass in there and have that really easy for the glazer rather than trying to pocket individual sections for your glass. So that's how I would approach it, and then I'll just save that cabinet into my library. So I've got that for next time. That would be how I'd go about that. And you could apply the same rule really to any of the kind of glass doors. I will say if you're just using like a single glass door, there's no need to go to that much effort. In the CNC panel tool groups, and just to quick divert into that section there, I'll bring this open and show you here. So we're going to libraries, CNC tooling, and panel tool groups. You can definitely create like a glass door option. So usually with a glass door, the way I'd sort of go about it would be something along these lines. I would have a few tools. So I would have a tool that's going to give me the rebate in the back of the door. I would have another tool that's then going to cut through the material from the back again, so I don't have to flip the door. I can have my hinges and everything on this side, and I might, choose how much I want that to go through, and then you can just nominate through cut there for that really easily. And then I might come in with like a 3mm down spiral to just get me tighter into the corner, or I could just use a chisel and square that out, each to their own. But that's kind of how I would generically go about it, because what that's going to do straight away, looking at this from the underside, is give you that kind of appearance where you're going to cut the door loose, you're going to create your rebate, and you're going to get in nice and tight there with the 3mm down spiral. You may even run the 3mm around this one as well, again, to get you closer into the corner. That just depends if your glaze is actually going to go ahead and round the corners of the glass or not, So depending on how you want to go about that, but there's certainly options for managing glass doors in a fair few different ways. All right, let's have a look to see how we've got any other questions coming through. There's definitely one here that says, how do you go about importing items, i.e. sinks and handles, from the 3D warehouse? That one's a fairly detailed topic. I think what we'll do next week, we'll make that our sort of hero topic of the week. I'll start with that next week. We'll go through and we'll import a couple of different examples, like you said, a handle and a sink. We'll look at how both of them work. We'll look at the sort of things that you need to be aware of, like that it needs to be a SketchUp V8 model. So just the model needs to be saved as a SketchUp version 8 model itself. You want to be careful of how many sort of faces and sort of facets or sides the actual model has itself. You basically also just, want to look at the reference point of where the sink or the handle is being read from. So I'll sort of do a bit of prep work on that. I'll get a couple of examples. We'll dive in. We'll probably spend 20, 30 minutes or so going through and talking about that specific topic. Definitely one that I think a lot of people would love to know about. So appreciate the question, but certainly couldn't answer that in the next kind of 5 minutes that we have remaining. Okay, I've set my dados, but I'm not getting 3mm holes in the top front rail. It might depend on what part you're using, what part type you are using for that. So if I go back to this one and have a look, just to show you, looking at this, so it really depends on the part type that you've got. So you can see in this particular example, I don't have any of those holes coming through. And it really depends on your construction method or your fastener settings and what part you're using. There's two main parts you can use there. So we've got a front stretcher enabled here, and that's using the part type stretcher. So depending on your rules for how you've got that in your fastener setting. So if I go into job parameters and I have a look under fasteners, I'm using a fastener called CADmate screws. I'm going to go into libraries and hardware and then dive into fasteners, open up joint templates, select the CADmate screws joint template, and then drop the end connection down. So I want to have a look at end to stretcher. And depending on the rules here of how this works, so how far in from the front edge you come, if you click on that option, you can certainly set a formula. And location number 2, how far in from the rear edge. And it really depends if that's going to work with the dado settings and sizes that you have, and then what size rail it's told to come in over. So this one's here restricted to the rail needing to be larger than 80 millimeters for the actual holes to come through. And then those holes will turn on and they'll be 25 million from each edge. I don't have a break dado distance set. So a break dado distance it'll give me a flat section there to drive the screw in through. So it really depends, A, what part type you're using, because you might be using a different part type, and B, just if you have any rule set on what length the joint needs to be, and what distance in those holes are coming. So a couple of things there, but if you're experiencing something there that you think it should be doing something and it's not, certainly send the job through to help desk. Let's take a look at it and we can get back to you with an answer there. Can you show me how to draw slope cabinets? Let's see, for example, cabinets under staircase or a slope ceiling. Yes, so this is going to be so much easier soon when V12 is released, as its shaping's the major feature of V12. So look, I can show you what we've done in the CADmate library to sort of get around that in the meantime. So let's delete a few things here and make this a bit easier to see. So I'm just going to delete that wall and just show you first of all, how to just shape a wall. So you can right click on this wall and go shape wall. And then with the wall shape itself, it can be vaulted, meaning that you can vault it left or right or cathedral style, or you can just draw your own shape, which is my preference there. And I'm going to press edit shape. And then it brings up the wall itself in the shape editor. So I'm 3 meters across the wall. I'm 2.4 meters high on the wall. And what I can do there is I can grab one of those points. I might say grab the right-hand point and define the new size of it. So I might say it slopes from 3 meters or 2.4 meters down to say, let's say 1.5, 1500. Right, and that defines then my angle of my slope. I'm going to go ahead and OK that and then look at this from my front view. So now looking at it from the front view, what you'll see in the CADmate library, there's an option here under tall cabinets for tall sloped cabinets. And then depending on whether you want it to slope left or right and single door or 2-door, you can go ahead and drag out the appropriate option. And then you want to change a few things. I'm just going to show you this just on one cabinet in the middle of the screen. So I'm just going to click the center button to bring that up. Now, first of all, I need to know the distance from the floor to the top of that, so I know how high my cabinet needs to be. So I'm going to take a dimension tool and I'm going to start here. I want to grab the top of the cabinet there, and I just want to go ahead and grab the bottom of the wall, and I want to do that parallel. So I'm going to move it parallel. So that shows me that it's 2 meters and 64.2. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and click on that cabinet and change the height to 264.2. That's going to reduce the height down, right? So now, and you might want to shadow above that or something, so you might want to come down an extra 20 millimeters or something as well. There's certainly options there. On the right-hand side, I'm going to then use my parameters to get that value right, but same thing, I want to take a measurement. So I'm going to go ahead and snap, and you'll find it snaps really easy to the top of the wall and the side of the cabinet. I'm going to click on that option there and go to the bottom right-hand corner and bring that out parallel. So that's 1835.8. So I'm going to click on the cabinet here and go into edit, go to parameters, and then change my slope height value to 1835.8 and press enter. And that's going to slope the cabinet down. Now, I do need to take into account my toe height as well. So worth checking just on the job parameters here under toe, because this cabinet does have a toe. It's 140 millimeters. So what I want to do there is actually make the parameter less 140 millimeters. So it can be just easier to bring up the calculator here and type in the 1435.8 minus 140, enter 1695.8. So in here, I'm going to go 1695.8, type the right value, 0.8, and press enter and OK. That's going to bring that down. So now my cabinet is perfectly sloped and aligned with my ceiling. So that's how you can go about doing sloped cabinets. As I mentioned, that's certainly going to be easier in the next version of Mozaik, but at the moment, that's certainly how you can go about it. So we've just sort of created, a parametric cabinet there, where we've shaped the parts. We've got a couple of random parts here just to work out the sin, tan, hypotenuse, just basic algebra to figure out the correct sort of slope and size. And we're rotating the top itself. We're setting the length of it based on that algebra equation, and we're also rotating that part by the same thing. So it's looking at the equation there to work out the rotation. But for you to use, pretty simply, it's just using your dimension tool to figure out the height of the cabinet, first of all, getting that right, and then figuring out the slope height and entering that in your parameter. Rightio. So that is pretty much all we have time for today, and I think I've sort of answered every question. Apologise if I have missed anyone, but look, appreciate everyone taking part in this. I think that this will be a very useful resource for everyone. Throw your questions at me. Think about it during the week. Think about what you want to learn and what you want to get out of these sessions. I hope there can be a new useful thing that we can do. As I mentioned sort of last week, happy to carve out an hour each week and sit down with you guys like this, reaching everyone in sort of one 1 hour session. I think such a valuable way to spend my time, but also to help you guys. So appreciate everyone's input today. Appreciate everyone that's showed up and asked questions. And until next week, have a great week. Speak to you soon.